Here we are, another pleasant, cool afternoon, mid-October. While I'm doing this little presentation, this video, people are out there voting. Maybe the week after next I'll analyse what's happened regarding The Voice. But I'd like to examine the Australian response to the current Palestinian-Israeli crisis, because I think for a long time most people have had no understanding of what's actually going on. We see the consequences of Israeli policy, but in terms of understanding the situation in this particular corner of the world, most Australians have no idea whatsoever. I think the first point we need to make is the Palestinians didn't cause the Holocaust. They were not involved in the Holocaust. The dispersal of the Jewish people as a consequence of their revolts against the Roman Empire happened over 2,000 years ago. And for the last 2,000 years, anti-Semitism has been a European phenomenon, mainly a European phenomenon. And pogroms, ghettos, restricted occupations have all been part and parcel of this. It is a European phenomenon. Although anti-Semitism may exist in other parts of the world, it is not in the DNA of those particular population. So Europe has asked the Palestinian people to bear the cost of the Holocaust. And we've turned our back on these people since the creation of the Jewish state, or the Israeli state, in the late 1940s. So when you see these pictures and see a harrowing accounts of survivors of the current Hamas operation and the Israeli response to that operation, it's very easy to forget the background. It's a little bit like Australians forgetting the fact that we are a colonial settler society, and that genocide was part and parcel of the process that was used to colonise this land. It's the same historical amnesia. So I'm sure nobody can actually argue with the fact that the Palestinian people were not responsible for the Holocaust. And the Nazi Party final solution policy, which was enacted by the Nazi Party in Germany and which was supported by many Europeans, including Australians and English, is something we've forgotten. In central Victoria, in Tatura, there were prison camps, and Jewish refugees from the Holocaust, from Austria and Germany, were placed in these prison camps in Australia during World War II. And there was a huge resistance to Holocaust survivors coming to this country after World War II. So we need to understand the historical background to understand the Palestinian response. Now let's look at Gaza. What is Gaza? Gaza is a strip of land about the quarter the size of Hobart. I think it's about 40 kilometres by about 8 kilometres, which has got the most densely populated area on the planet Earth. 2.3 million Palestinians have been squeezed into this little outpost. And in reality, Gaza is nothing more than the world's largest prison camp. And if I treated a dog in the same way successive Israeli governments, with majority support from Israeli citizens, if I did that, I'd find myself in court in this country if I did the same thing to a dog. So it's not surprising to see what has happened. Just look at the last 20 years of life in Gaza. 2.3 million people, over 1 million children under 15, 4 incursions by Israeli forces which use overwhelming force to try to contain dissent, arbitrary arrest and imprisonment, 70% unemployment, and the world turns its eyes the other way. We shrug our shoulders, and when what happened a week ago or 2 weeks ago, when you see this, becomes a reality, we see almost wholesale support for Israel, or the Israeli state and the Israeli government. Forgetting that over the last decade, apart from over 10,000 Palestinians being killed in Israeli incursions in the Gaza Strip, over 30% children, we see wholesale support among government forces for the Israeli solution as far as Gaza is concerned. We also see an extraordinary amount of media support for the Israeli state, especially in the corporate-owned media. We've seen a little bit more balanced response in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where Palestinian voices, and let's not forget, we have a large Palestinian refugee population in this country, as well as we had the largest number of Holocaust survivors come to this country after World War II. So we find the type of response lacking in terms of the debate. There's no debate. And now we're seeing government at both the state and federal level putting in place legislation and using police to criminalise legitimate protest activity by Palestinians and Palestinian activists in this country. Now obviously, there always has been and there will continue to be anti-Semitic content or ideas which a small minority hold. But the Palestinian struggle is not a struggle about anti-Semitism, it's a struggle about survival. The Jewish state was created in order, that's the Israeli state was created in order for Jewish people to have a homeland. But that led to the dispossession of people who had lived there for over 2,000 years. If you want to look at the situation in a different light, think of the situation here in Australia. Aboriginal people were here on this continent for over 65,000 years, Torres Strait Islanders for almost 20,000 years. Colonisation began in 1788, and 235 years later, the descendants of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders make up less than 4% of the population. Now, if the original inhabitants came back 235 years later and attempted to displace the settlers that had flourished here in the last 230 years, I'm sure there will be a hullabaloo. The fact that no campaign receives so much support from so many sections of the Australian society highlights how concerned people are regarding the original inhabitants, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, First Nations people, asking for compensation, self-determination and sovereign rights. It's the same in Palestine. 2,000 years later, not only was the Israeli state created as a consequence of the Holocaust and European guilt, but the Palestinian people were asked to bear the consequences of that. Denied the right of return, and as I said before, in many cases treated in the most extraordinary manner. So what do you expect will happen? So what do you expect? Brutality begets brutality. If I treat a dog in the same manner the people of Gaza has been treated in the last 50 years, since the 67 war, what do you expect? A people with no hope, no future, basically with no freedom of movement? What do you expect? Obviously they will turn to forces that promise that they will liberate them. And whether these forces, the Hamas people, actually are capable of this or not is a different matter. What is the issue is that thousands and thousands of Palestinians have died during this period for no gain, no negotiations. Although Hamas has a policy of not recognising the State of Israel, many people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip would be happy with a two-state solution. If you don't want this cycle of brutality to continue ad nauseum for the next 5 or 6 generations, negotiation is the only way out of this. But the dilemma is, in the United States, in Australia, in Europe, the very nations which have been responsible for 2,000 years of anti-Semitism, the European people, now expect the Palestinian people to bear the full price for the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. They have not placed any pressure on Israel to come to a negotiated settlement. When successive extreme right Israeli governments, which have been elected by their people, continue to pass legislation to expand illegal settlements under the United Nations rules, to dispossess Palestinians in their farmlands, to have arbitrary arrests, to deny Palestinians a future, let alone a homeland, what do you expect? And that's the dilemma. Unless the West, and that includes Australia, puts pressure on the Israeli state to begin serious negotiations to create a two-state solution, this cycle of violence will continue ad nauseum. But what do we see in Australia, which is the situation I'm familiar with? We see more of the same total support for the Israeli state, irrespective of its policies as far as Palestinians are concerned. The same support. We are enablers. We enable the Israeli state to continue policies which not only put the Palestinians' future in jeopardy, but more importantly, put the future of the whole world in jeopardy. Because this is one flashpoint, the Middle East, which quite easily blow out of control. If you think what's happening in the Ukraine is horrific, I can assure you what's happening in Israel and Palestine today is much more horrific, and could very easily draw all of us into some type of war we no longer want. So it's time the Australian state and the Australian people put pressure on the Israeli government, irrespective of its political hues, to change its policies. As I said at the beginning, and I'll repeat it again, the Palestinians were not responsible for the Holocaust. The Europeans were responsible for the Holocaust. 2,000 years of European anti-Semitism led to the Holocaust. It's not fair that people who had nothing to do now pay the greatest price because of policies which were put in place by governments and political and social and cultural movements that had anti-Semitism as their base. Nothing will change unless we as a people accept responsibility and place direct pressure on the Israeli government to stop the bombardment of the Gaza Strip and to begin serious negotiation regarding a two-state solution, which may mean the removal of settlers from settlements which had no right to have been built in the first place. History is everything. If you don't understand the past, if you don't know your past, you won't understand the present, and there will be no change in the future.